All right, good morning. Study session. I believe Councilmember Mumm is out of town and won't be joining us. We've got three matters plus an executive session. First is going to be the 2021 Comprehensive Plan Amendment Work Program. And the second is going to be Transportation Program Update. And then a discussion about council meeting procedures going forward. So I think Kevin Freebot is in charge of the comp plan amendments. So Kevin, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Council President. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. I always ask. You never know on these systems. Good morning, Council President, members of the council. For those of you in the audience, my name is Kevin Freibot. I'm a planner with the Planning Services Department. And I'm here today to give you a very brief overview of the applications under consideration this year. Give me just one moment here and I'll get my presentation up on the screen for you. So I know we only have 30 minutes today and I want to be very respectful of your time. So what I'd like to suggest is that I'll just bang through this. If you have questions, please stop me. We can stop and discuss an individual application. And then if we run out of time, we certainly can come back next week if council schedule allows. I just don't want to I don't want to rush if you have questions or discussion. So feel free to stop me along the way. But what I hope to do today is give you a very brief refresher on the program itself, an overview of the individual applications, and of course to take any questions from council. So as you'll recall, the revised Code of Washington does allow us to amend our comprehensive plan once a year, and we do this through our amendment program. The applications can be submitted by anybody, and they can change maps or text or policy of the comprehensive plan, but they are considered as a group. They do run through the process as a group, and we do, of course, look at the impacts of each individually, but also cumulatively. And of course, SEPA review is required, although we don't have any SEPA analysis done yet or any SEPA information yet. This is just the first part of the process where those details haven't really been worked out yet. Again, very quickly, but the process itself is mandated by the municipal code, and it goes a little like this. We take applications in September, October. A docketing committee of 3 council members and 3 plan commissioners meet to discuss the applications and recommend which should move forward. And then, of course, City Council does consider a resolution to set the actual docket of applications. That's what we're hoping to kickstart with this briefing or with this study session today, is to get towards that resolution to start the process. Once we have our work program established, there's a 14-day agency and department comment time period where neighborhood council contacts city departments and county and other adjacent agencies can comment on the applications, and then they go out for full public comment for 60 days, during which we have many workshops with Plan Commission to discuss each in detail. Ultimately, Plan Commission provides a recommendation at a hearing, usually August, later in the summer, and then that recommendation goes to City Council for consideration of the adoption of which application should be adopted and which shouldn't. Obviously, once that's complete, it goes on to the mayor. So that's our general process. We do this every year, but I do want to highlight that there are several opportunities where public comment are taken, including this threshold process or docketing process, and you will be provided with the comments that we received as part of the agenda packet. So the threshold determination itself, again, we've notified all the neighborhoods. We've put it on the web. We've talked to Community Assembly Land Use and Community Assembly in general, just so that everyone knows that these are the applications and that they're going forward. Again, the docketing committee has made a recommendation, and now we're seeking that City Council consider a resolution actually setting our work program. There are specific thresholds in the municipal code to consider. Very briefly, just as a primer, they're very specific, and you'll notice that they're not all about should this be adopted or not. They're more about, is this appropriately a comprehensive plan, and do we have time to do it? So the first one is this appropriately addressed as a comprehensive plan amendment? Then we look at, is it already part of an ongoing work program? None of the ones this year are part of an ongoing work program item. C is we look at whether it can be reasonably reviewed within the resources and time frame. Keep in mind these move as a group, so if we have one that takes longer and holds up the others, that is something to consider at the docketing stage. Also, during the docketing, City Council can expand the scope of an application. It's generally limited to nearby similarly situated properties. So in other words, nearby properties that are in the same situation, the same conditions as the proposal, council can expand the application. Last year, we expanded 2 of them. Also, we check to make sure that, in general, that the proposed amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan. And then the last 2 are whether it's, if it was a proposal last year that the threshold process denied or did not include, it can't come back unless from the previous year. They can't just resubmit. They have to substantially modify it. Just as a note, none of the applications this year were rejected last year, so they don't fall, none of the ones fall into F. And then G is, of course, if we have an amendment that's required because of a change in state or local law. None of the ones this year are being proposed because of a change in law. So F and G really are moot for this year's consideration. So before I go into the applications themselves, are there any questions on the process? I know I went really fast. I apologize. Okay, not seeing any. I'm just going to keep banging on here. We do have 7 private applications. All of them are land use plan map changes. That's LU1, which is the big land use map in Chapter 3 of the comprehensive plan. They're all they're in various locations throughout the city, various neighborhoods, as you can see from this graphic. We do have several that are towards the center of the city, and then of course 2 in the far south. And just as a reminder, I did send you all the information packet earlier this week, so I'm going to only hit these very lightly. If you have questions, please let me know. I'm happy to answer anything that we do know already on these. So the first one is 194. This one is the McKinley School. It's just 1 block north of Sprague, which is an existing center on our land use plan map. The applicant is hoping to include this property into the center so that they can maintain the historic building and the historic use of the building, but also to fully utilize the site and redevelop other parts of the site that aren't the historic building. So it is on Napa, which is a minor arterial just north of Sprague. It's about 2.5 acres, and nothing in their proposal would eliminate the McKinley School. This is about the rest of the property and allowing development there. So it's currently designated for light industrial, but you can see it is immediately north of this dark purple, which is the Centers and Corridors core, and they would like to fold that in and become part of the center core. So that's essentially what that's the only change that they would like to make. Their zoning obviously would change as well to match the zoning of the core properties to the south. We did receive a public comment in support of this proposal, and the docketing committee recommended that we include it in the annual docket for the year for consideration. And that's it for 194. Unless you have a question, I'll continue on to the next. So 195, this one is in Latah Hangman on the southern boundary of the city. You can see the Eagle Ridge developments to the west and to the north here, but the site itself is entirely, well, it's vacant except for I think there's some rural buildings to the north, and there's some walking trails on the site, impromptu walking trails on the site. It's several parcels. It's about 100 acres in size. And this one is a little different. What they're hoping to do is to designate a new district center in this location. There isn't currently a center in this area. The applicant has cited the need for more commercial services and retail to serve the neighborhood to the west and to the north, and specifically one that they can walk to instead of drive to. And so what they've proposed is very schematic. This is not specifically detailed and exact yet, but currently it is designated residential 4 to 10, which is single family homes. And they would like to, of course, designate a center. And typically with a center, we have a CC core land use in the middle, and it's surrounded often by other land uses that support that center. Higher density residential, which you can see here to the south, Oftentimes you'll see commercial or office as used as a buffer. They are considering, a buffer on the west side of remaining single family so that they can provide some kind of a transition into the neighborhood. Again, this is totally schematic. Just to give you some context, Councilmember Mumm, who isn't here, had asked for this before. This is a wider view of this part of the city, and you can see here the center, the parcels that would be part of the center designation. And the nearest services and retail is this community business, which is about 1.5 miles up the highway. They also, of course, can go up to the Regal Center area. There's some commercial up in that area, but it's about 2 miles away. And so you can see that this is somewhat isolated. And much of this entire area to the west has already been developed with single-family homes. Now, because they're asking to designate a center, and because centers have specific needs for planning, this one's a little different. So I'm going to take a few seconds to go through the policies. When we talk about centers, that's land use 3, the goal 3 in the chapter 3 land use chapter. And it specifically states how to designate centers, and it talks about the process they should go through. The most important thing to think of is, yes, a private entity, in this case a property owner, can request that we designate a center. Totally appropriate within the policy. But it does, the policy 3.3 and 3.4 talk about the need for a city-approved process, and typically a sub-area planning process is what's mentioned. And that process is what would develop the size, the specific location, the land uses and zoning around the center. Basically, all of the detail work is worked out in that sub-area plan. And so that's what the comp plan directs us to do. Rather than just putting a center core land use somewhere, there's a process that it recommends. We did receive one comment letter from a neighbor that was in opposition of the idea. And the docketing committee did talk quite a bit about this one. Staff recommended and the docketing committee agreed that really if council would like to move forward on considering this one, that it would take enough time and resources that it would be longer than our normal annual process, and that by processing this one as a sub-area plan or as doing the planning work that's necessary for a center, it would hold up the others unfairly. And so the recommendation of the committee was to process this separately, and we can do that. Sub-area plans aren't beholden to the annual process. And so we've developed a draft resolution along those lines where the resolution setting the work program would separate this application from the work program, and then there would be a separate process by which this center would be considered designated and planned. So that's the story for 195. The next one is 196.
Hey, Kevin.
Yes, sir.
Real quick question. How long would that separate process take? Do you believe?
It's difficult to say. We haven't done very many of them. And it depends on how expansive the analysis has to be. We know there are some infrastructure challenges in this location. We know that there are multiple property owners adjacent. There's a lot of topics involved. The neighborhood would have to be involved. So we're not looking at a 9-month process. It's very difficult to say. It's certainly more than a year generally. The last one we did was multiple years, but it also included a development agreement and significant challenges with working with the neighborhood and the developer. So it's hard to say.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Excellent question. Councilmember.
Kevin, that's it. So separating this out and the work that goes with it, again, would not affect the others going forward. But I thought that we were challenged staff-wise to get the work done that was already on your plate. So how would that figure into it?
No, that's an excellent question. And actually, for that, I'm gonna pass that off to Lewis or to Tyrell, who should both be here. Unfortunately, my participants list has disappeared. But Lewis, if you're here, can you speak to that?
Yeah, we don't really know yet. It would have to be scoped and have to figure out how to resource it. So there may be a few different options if we started off with a development agreement or a process agreement with the developer. Maybe they are helping to fund that all of that work by hiring a consultant themselves and the city participating in that. We just don't know. that area of the city has, as you know, there's an ongoing transportation study currently because of transportation deficiencies, and it has pretty serious water deficiencies also that would need to be addressed through that sub-area process. It's holding up development currently, and we'll be sharing more information regarding the 195 study and other utility infrastructure issues very soon over the course of this year.
Thank you, Louis.
Thank you, Louis.
Thanks. Good question, Councilman. Okay, so with your permission, I'll keep going. The next one is 196. This is in the Southgate neighborhood. This might look familiar because it's almost adjacent to one we considered last year. This one concerns 3 parcels, very close to the intersection of Palouse Highway and Freya. You can see them marked here. They are a little oddly shaped, solely because there are some existing homes to the north, and the Moody Bible Institute offices are here in the east. They're not a part of this proposal. But it is a greenfield site. There is significant development surrounding it already. It's about 10 acres. Their proposal is to take it from its single-family homes or residential 4 to 10 units per acre, and to update it to residential 15 to 30, which is our multifamily density. Not high-rise apartments, more like 3-story walk-up kind of apartments. Basically what you see around it now to the west and to the northwest. And so that is the proposal. Now, when you do recall last year we had an application that was substantially the same. It was just to the northwest, and also the committee this year did discuss certain areas that we might consider to expand this to, or that at least properties adjacent and nearby that are in the same situation. And there's several areas. So we've got this original application of 10 acres-ish. And these are the areas that we discussed with the committee. So, of course, there's the little Moody Bible Institute piece. The residential to the north, there's 2 different groupings here. You can see the sizes on the left of the different ones. And then, of course, if council wanted to look at the situation again from last year, there are the 2 pieces to last year's proposal that are in the same situation. They are adjacent to this proposal, so they could be folded in theoretically if that was the desire of council. I hate giving you guys a big menu of options, but this one does have a lot of boundaries that we could look at and a lot of conditions.
So, Kevin, don't take me all the way back, but the challenges that existed with the original application that was declined last year, and then this, as you say, is in a similar situation. So explain to me again, what is significantly different that this one rose to where you would recommend supporting? I guess I'm missing it.
Okay. There isn't a significant change in what we knew last year. There isn't new information or a new traffic study that was done, or I believe that the challenges that were identified by council and why it was voted down were related to traffic, circulation up there, and certainly council members who remember their challenges to the one last year, feel free to speak up, which I see council member Stratton is there as well. Just very quickly, though, just as a side note, when it comes to transportation and traffic, both this one and the one last year, we did speak to Integrated Capital Management. They did identify some mitigation specifically for the proposal. There are also traffic impact fee improvements in this area that these would contribute to. And so, staff did not have necessarily significant traffic concerns for the last year either. So I don't, there hasn't been a big new revelation, but there isn't from there, but it's in the same situation. And then also the applicant is asked for the opportunity to move forward so that they can do some kind of traffic analysis with our ICM department to determine really what the impact of this would be. And Terrell, did you have something to add before? I think Councilmember Stratton wanted to speak too.
I believe in the packet for this one that the applicant has provided some preliminary discussion about the traffic impact. So that is in your packet and in the record for you to review.
Yes, so that is available as well.
Kevin, this is Karen. I was just going to add that I'm just looking at my notes from the meeting, that one of the big concerns just that I wrote down was that there is, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, if I got this wrong, but there is currently, the neighborhood hasn't gone through any neighborhood planning process. So I remember that was one of the big issues that came up as we discussed this, was that there's been no neighborhood plan created.
If I could respond to that, Councilmember, I'd like to. And actually, I apologize. I'm going to skip forward here very quickly to a graphic. Southgate did do some neighborhood planning, and so they have used their neighborhood planning dollars that was provided by council to each of the neighborhoods. And their plan was a two-parter. It talked about public parks and open space, and then they also had a connectivity master plan. And so this is just one graphic from their plan that talked about connectivity. So they have done their neighborhood planning process. It wasn't a sub-area planning process necessarily, although they did participate in the planning process that we had for the Southgate Center. And you can see on their graphic here, this kind of beigey dotted area, it's an odd symbology. That's the Southgate Center that's around the Target. So they considered it in their planning. There's also the one to the south, which is only part of it has been annexed to the city. So they included that as well. And they do have some routes and connections that they've identified in this location. So last year we talked about, this north-south, in our staff report, we talked about this north-south connector and how to accommodate that. This year's application, and it's kind of hard to see, but it's right here in the middle. And so it includes discussion about this light blue line is local access, but there's also some work that the neighborhood did to identify traffic improvements that they would be interested in. And so, there has been some neighborhood planning, but it isn't that necessarily the neighborhood plan sought to change the land uses. It was more that we had the center planning process and they were a participant, and then this considered that as well. Does that help, Councilmember? Does it kind of clarify where it was?
That is great clarification. Thank you. That helps me a lot.
Great.
Hey, Kevin. Sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to add that on that map it showed a potential STA park and ride, but that has been constructed now and is in the vicinity of this proposal.
Yes.
Does anybody know? So there's some work proposed for Freya Ray that's supposed to help with congestion on Regal. Do we know the timing of that project and how that would relate to congestion issues in this part of Regal?
That question was asked at the committee. That's a great question. That study is specifically more in the northern end of Southgate neighborhood. Obviously, that study would be informed by this process as well, but it isn't the end-all solution and consideration of this development or the one that was rejected last year. So they're related, but it isn't everything to everybody kind of a thing for traffic.
Yeah, and then another point for members of the public and the council, that at this point in the process, we have not yet, we do not require any SEPA documents, so we do not require any traffic studies or any information until after these are put onto the work program.
Yeah, that typically occurs at the agency comment stage. That's when we get comments from our city departments and other agencies that say, wait, we would like to request this study, or we are concerned about this traffic, so let's do an impact analysis. So, if this moves forward, then we would, of course, ask those questions. Great. So anyways, this application, we did receive one comment letter. It was not necessarily in opposition or support. It was more, we want to make sure that the city looks at this. We want to make sure that the city looks at this. It's from an adjacent property owner. And the docketing committee did not vote on this. They did not pass any recommendation either way, so no action. I have a full 4 minutes left, Council President. Would you like me to keep going? Would you like me to stop?
Keep going.
I have 3 more applications, or 4
Keep going.
more applications. I'm sorry? I couldn't hear you.
Keep going.
Yes, sir. So 206, this one is on Cleveland. We're looking at real close to Division, just where where Division and Ruby come back together and start to go north up the bluff. You can see here, this is the WSDOT facility. So those of you who've been there, you kind of, just to kind of orient yourself. It's a single property of about 0.8 acres. It's just at the foot of the bluff. It's under the bluff. Everything you see to the north of it here is significantly higher in elevation. And you'll see some older photos of this site sometimes, like Google Maps. Just know that the home on this site was removed previously. It still shows up on aerial photos, but it doesn't exist anymore. And that wasn't a part of this proposal. That was separate. So what they're hoping to do is, you can see here that they're currently designated for residential 4 to 10, but across the street to the west, there's some multifamily, that residential 15 to 30 dwelling units. They would like to be included as part of that multifamily area. This one is not in a center. It is not in a designated center, but it is close to Division Street. You can see that everything to the south and is general commercial. And again, it is generally separated from the north homes by that bluff. So it's got some interesting discussion points. We did not receive any public comment on this, and the docketing committee recommended that this move forward unanimously. So the next is 207. Now we're on Monroe Street on the north. This is adjacent to the North Monroe road right sizing and streetscape improvements that we did a couple of years ago. It's a single parcel. It's this little red parcel that currently contains a single family home. But this hash marked area you can see is all the same owner. We do identify when the adjacent ownership is the same, and we also notice off of that larger area, so I wanted to make sure you were aware. The owner owns the east half of the block. So they have about 0.7 acres of additional property. There is a city alleyway here to consider, but basically their intent is this one piece of their properties is zoned and has a different land use than the others. They spoke to wanting to redevelop this northern half of their property and to include something that went back as far as to the south, and so it's more of a consistency thing for them. You can see it here on the land use plan map. We've got a residential 4 to 10, but everything on the Monroe Street corridor there is general commercial. You can see their property to the south is entirely general commercial, and so their hope is to just fold this property into that general commercial area. We didn't receive any public comments on this one, and again, the docketing committee did recommend that this move forward. 208, this is further south on Monroe. We're now south of Northwest. In fact, you can see Maxwell Avenue is this northern avenue right here. And I want to point out real quick, these last two applications are they're very close to each other, but they are separate applications and they are separate proposals. So you will see them on each other's maps, but they're not related. So in this case, what we have are two properties, one containing a multifamily development, and the other one is a single family home. The two properties are about half an acre in size. And again, the proposal is to fold these into the adjacent corridor. Monroe Street is a corridor for most of its length in this area. These two properties are currently zoned residential 10 to 28 units per acre. That's duplex zoning, if you think about it that way. And what they would like to do is just bring it up in residential density to residential 15 plus. You can see here on the east side of the corridor, I lost my laser pointer, 1 second. On the east side of the corridor, there is residential 15 plus already as a buffer between the center, or the corridor in this case, and the residential neighborhood behind it. They're seeking the same thing. And it's identical height to the commercial. So it's 55 feet. So they're looking to do about the same thing. They just want to do it on the west side of Monroe. This one,
Kevin,
yes, sir.
Before you go to that, I'm just wondering, was there any discussion about trying to include that one little yellow parcel between, or the ones up above it? I know they didn't apply, but it seems like we kind of want to not have piecemeal. So what was the discussion on that?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. And actually, I was just going to get there.
Okay.
You beat me to it. So the application itself is the half acres. That's what this owner owns. But we did look at two additional. One is that little property between the general commercial and R15. It would seem odd to have a duplex and then a higher density next to it. And then also you could consider the rest of the block to the north, which has the same. You can kind of see that this is the next proposal that we're going to talk about. You know, already this kind of more dense use will be the block width. Everything to the east is kind of a block deep. So the committee looked at both this individual parcel and then the whole thing. And actually their recommendation was to include all of it. Okay. So both areas 1 and 2. We didn't receive any public comment periods. We didn't receive any public comments. And the docketing committee recommended to move it forward and to include both areas 1 and 2. Okay, last one. 209. This one is just to the north of the previous one. It's on the north side of Maxwell. It is right on Monroe Street, and it's owned by the Spokane School District. So this is a District 81 facility. And so they are seeking, ultimately they would like to redevelop this school into a more modern building, a better facility for what it is. And, but to do that, they would have to amend the land use and zoning in order to give them the density they need and the height they need. And so it's a school now. They're proposing it to, well, stay a school. They're not selling or anything like that. And essentially it's currently zoned residential 2-family, but it's in the corridor. It's facing the corridor. And their hope would be to go to a CC core land use, because that way, when we do complete the planning on this section of the Monroe corridor, they're already ready. They're already part of the core. They don't have to go through this again necessarily. So their proposal is to duplex zoning and land use to a core, center core. They're on the corridor itself. No comments were received on this one. Docketing committee recommended this one move forward. Last non-private one. We have one public application this year. This is the one city-sponsored proposal, similar to the one we did last year, amending map TR5, which is the bike map. These are different amendments because the ones last year were all approved. So this is a new set of 11 changes. 9 of them are just amendments to existing routes, refinements of routes or changes of whether it's a soft surface path or a shared use path. And then there's 2 new additions, one downtown, just east of the Maple corridor area, and then one additional neighborhood greenway, which is up here in Shiloh Hills along either sides of Division. So this was in the packet. The committee did not consider this because the docketing committee doesn't look at the city-sponsored ones. So this is the kind of the first bash at this proposal, and I did provide you the link to all the details in your email. So what we have here is, again, City Council would consider a resolution to set the work program. We've got the recommendation from the ad hoc committee that I've given to you, including their findings. And then to the purpose of our meeting today, I would like to request permission to drop this into OnBase as a resolution for council to consider later this month to set the work program and to move us forward. And then I have the threshold committee or threshold criteria if you'd like to see them again. And then of course the table of applications. This is just for you to see if you would like to discuss these further or if you have any additional questions. And that's pretty much what I've got for you. And other than that, I'm happy to answer questions.
Hey, Kevin, I'm wondering, do we have any sort of special designation that could be used for, particularly for the school rather than a CC core? I mean, I guess I don't really understand the necessity of designating it as a center like that.
We could look at other land use designations and zoning that would allow them what they are seeking to do on the property. Ultimately, when that section of Monroe gets planned for the center, of course, that might change. We typically make the center of the center CC core, and then it's zoned specifically CC1 or CC2 or CC3. Those are the types of centers. So there isn't like a special school one. Because schools are allowed in many different zones and land uses.
So my I guess bigger picture thought is, in terms of like when we do our land quantity analysis, are we looking at that and saying, oh, residential could be going there? We could, in theory, but really it's a school and you're never going to have residential there? So I'm wondering, when we do those sorts of things, are we skewing numbers?
It depends on the study, but with the land quantity analysis specifically, we exclude all government exempt properties.
Okay.
So schools are taken out of that account right away. So are, city facilities, city hall is not included in that amount. Those kinds of things.
Okay, so it would be excluded.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Regardless of what zoning or land use it is. It's actually one of the first steps.
Great.
Great question, though.
Other questions for Kevin? I have one for you.
Yes, sir.
Going back to Southgate, and we've got the application from this year, and we still got the application from last year. They had kind of similar concerns, even though I believe the Planning Commission recommended the one from last year. But that was, we need to do more planning, even though we've done what the neighborhood has asked with the limited funds we gave them. But what would be the planning, assuming we allocated funds to do it, that would, do you think, and either you or Lewis or Terrell can answer, that need to be done before we could evaluate those two projects?
This is a really good question that I'm also going to hand off to Lewis, just because of the background that he's got that I don't have in my head. So, Lewis, if you don't mind, could you?
Yeah, based on our current level of service standards, I mean, we could do a spot traffic analysis, and that's what the applicant is proposing for that area. Based on our current level of service analysis, though, from last year, traffic didn't have an issue with the proposal moving forward. Mm-hmm. If there are other community concerns, like maybe they don't like the current level of service that we allow in that area, that could be a part of a different discussion and would need to be part of a scoping process. But as of right now, we could have had additional development there at their comp plan proposal, and with our impact fee projects and with the other ongoing studies of the Ray-Freya crossover, we believe, based on our current level of service standards, the transportation system can accommodate that growth and other growth in the area.
So that is helpful, and it answers, I think, one of the questions that people have. But my understanding is the neighborhood is not as they are focused on that, but they're focused more broadly. Like, no, we want more planning in our neighborhood in general. And I'm just wondering what we call that, and I think they're just looking at from a higher elevation kind of planning, perhaps. I'm not sure exactly because I don't live in that neighborhood. But, I mean, there's sub-area planning that we were talking about doing down in Latah. So I'm just wondering what it is that we call and how extensive it is. Probably depends on what we decide how extensive it is. But just wondering your insights about that or thoughts.
Yeah, the neighborhood planning based on the $21,000 that are allocated to each geographic neighborhood, those are pretty limited scope plans because that funding and the staffing doesn't go very far. Mm-hmm. So they normally pick one or two top issues that they want to tackle and address. Mm-hmm. It's not really comprehensive planning for that area. It's a limited scope. Sub-area planning normally has some amount of scoping that goes involved too, and isn't just wide open from a land use, transportation, utility, other needs perspective. So it normally has a scoping process around it also. Mm-hmm. And that's defined by that process. That's a Pandora's box too. You open that up and you'll have every section of the city wants the same thing. So
okay. What's the timeline for a sub-area plan, assuming I realize the scope depends on it, but just typical, what would you say?
Typical, it takes a year, oftentimes closer to 2 years to wrap all of that up.
Okay.
It's like a downtown plan, but for a specific geographic area of the city.
Okay. And do we
really depends on the scope?
Okay. And sometimes we do it with staff, but sometimes do we contract out, or is that usually a staff?
No matter what, staff will be involved in managing a consultant contract. So there's some staffing that's there, but depending on the scope, we may have other departments involved, such as integrated capital, staff involved too. Really depends on the scope again.
Okay.
So, Council President?
Yes, Council Member.
I like your comment, Lewis, as Pandora's box. Not that I'm opposed to it, but we are also looking at infill closer into the city, and then other neighborhoods will be requesting the same thing. I know there are others who are already thinking about that. So if it's not going to be an equitable process for everyone, then I'm not sure we should be going down that road.
Fair enough. Other comments on either that issue or the overall docketing plan? So,
hey, just real quick, can somebody tell me what the route is for that proposed greenway from Shiloh across to, I don't know if it's Indian Trail or where that's quite going, but
the one in the north here, it runs along the south end of the cemetery, the Catholic cemetery, if you're familiar with that. It would then cross Division and head through some of those apartments that are there on streets, of course. The key on these, of course, is that these need much more planning. This is an aspirational kind of target for the future. They may change as development of actual design occurs and things like that.
Okay. Thank you.
If you see the email I sent this Tuesday, council member, there's a link there to the packet, the application packet, and it has the individual maps for every route.
Great.
I'm nothing if not a nerd when it comes to mapping. I've got lots of maps if you want them.
Other questions? All right. Then, yes, Kevin, we'll look forward to something in on base on this. Appreciate.
May I ask one quick question?
Of course.
Who would like to be the sponsor for this? Candace, Councilmember Mom was last year.
Who's the planning commission person?
I believe that's Councilmember Kinnear.
All right.
It's me.
Do you want to?
So yes, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
I would recommend Councilmember Kinnear.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilmember Stratton.
Terrific.
Okay.
And we'll get that in as soon as we have all the paperwork wrapped up and get it before you for consideration.
All right. Thank you so much for your work and all your maps.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to go to the transportation program update, continued from February 18th, and I'm assuming Kevin Piconso is leading that.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Council President. Just to do a quick time check here. I know we're a little beyond our time. Am I still good with 30 minutes, or do I need to kind of try to scale back a little?
Well, do your best, but we're pretty interested in this, so.
Okay. Well, I know there's an item after this, so
yep.
I'll make sure we need time.
Yep.
So I'm sharing my screen, so you guys should be seeing this now. Again, good morning, and thank you for the time. Again, my name is Kevin Piconso, the Integrated Capital Management. A couple other ICM staff are online as well, Inga Note and Catherine Miller as well. First, just as a reminder of what we spoke about 2 weeks ago in the first session, the intent of these study sessions are really just kind of give an overview about how the streets budget works in the annual update, the different sections within the budget, and sort of how projects arrive within the program. The first session 2 weeks ago was really focused on the street capital section, which is by far our largest section, both in terms of projects and funding amount. I did kind of an overview of the reconstruction matrix 2 weeks ago as well. You've seen some deeper dives presented by Inga Note on the reconstruction matrix and how that scoring process and prioritization process works. I also briefly touched on, and I'll bring this up and switch screens. I did also kind of highlight and show this list of projects from our matrix, highlighting projects that are currently in the program but are in the outer years and haven't fully received or identified grant dollars for them, as well as listed the projects that are on the reconstruction matrix but haven't yet been added to our program. And then finally, we briefly introduced or brought up this topic of roadways of significance from some past discussions with council. It seemed that there's interest in maybe revisiting this topic. It was something that was introduced around 4 or 5 years ago, around the same time as when the reconstruction matrix was developed. It provided a framework for for a very narrow way or opportunity for projects to be considered within the budget that maybe didn't score very high within the reconstruction matrix. Ultimately, that roadways of significance sort of process was never really adopted or implemented, but there's some interest now in reconsidering that. And that was one of our key takeaways from the study session 2 weeks ago, was that we do want to have some further discussion on that going forward, and that is our plan.
Kevin, I just yes. One comment about that. Since we had that meeting, I've heard from several people. One of the reasons I believe that council at the time, and I had just started, so I have a fuzzy memory of it, but we're not as excited about that particular proposal as I think it tried to lessen or exempt the complete streets provisions that went with a normal reconstruction. So when you're looking at the road, this kind of safety valve to get a roadway that might not, it would be helpful not necessarily put that in there with it, or if it is, call it out separately, perhaps a phased approach to get to the complete street standard or something like that. But I think that was perceived a little bit as a poison pill. So I just wanted to give you that feedback as you're coming back to us. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Council President?
Yes.
I'm not understanding what you're saying about that. That didn't make sense to me.
Well, when they were talking about going outside the matrix, they were saying, here's how we'd go outside the matrix, and we won't apply the complete streets ordinance when we go outside the matrix. So people who are complete streets fans said, no, don't do this safety valve process because we'll be getting streets that aren't up to complete street standards. That was combined, as my recollection.
It was my recollection too. It was so specific to Freya.
Yep. That was the driver. Freya was the driver. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Council President, for a little context, you were correct. The thought at the time, and this does not have to go forward, but the thought at the time was because the project was being picked from a lower scoring and basically leapfrogging over other higher scoring ones, that maybe it should just maintain focus on what the issue, the reason why it was being lifted was. And so that's where it kind of came about. And for the Freya one, for example, it was highly focused on making sure it could handle truck routes because it is an industrial area. And so the focus was to make sure that road could handle for the trucks. And the idea was, as that area developed, those properties who are traditionally required to do the improvements of the road would then come back and fill in the missing pieces, the curb, the sidewalks, and those such. So point being, that was just some of the theory and conversation back then, but we certainly are happy to open it up and find a new path forward.
Yeah, and I think as flexible as we can do as it comes back to council. So there's sort of an option A and an option B and some things like that, because again, just feedback I got that I think perhaps doomed that last time. So I'm like, okay, how do we go forward? So thanks.
Sure.
Great. Thank you. And then continuing on here, since the last study session, just 2 days ago, we had our PCTS meeting primarily focused on our budget update process and introducing the new projects and changes occurring this year within the budget. But I did bring up and mention this roadways of significance topic, just introduced it, let them know that we'd be coming back to PCTS with further discussion and planning that for a workshop in May where we can take a deeper dive on that topic. So moving on to what we really want to hit on today is to address the remaining sections of our street budget that we didn't talk about in the first session, primarily the bike section, our neighborhood section, and our traffic impact fee section. Again, I have listed really the 5 main sections that we have. I won't touch on bridge today. Bridge section is very narrow. It's very much driven by our ability or success in getting grants awarded. Currently there's only 2 projects in there. It's the existing Post Street Bridge project that's under construction and Hatch Rose Bridge deck repair. So that's a very limited section of our program, so I won't speak much to that today. The 3 ones we want to hit on again are head bike, neighborhood, and impact fee. And just important to note that on the street maintenance side of things, while in the past, at times the street maintenance program has been shown or displayed kind of in our document, it's been an appendix. It's not a core part of the annual street update. It doesn't fall under that same umbrella of being approved annually in our update prior to July 1st. So it's really a separate standalone element in and of itself. So the ped bike section, how do projects arrive there, and how is that part of the program populated? This section includes our standalone ped and bike projects. Really important to note, we also implement ped and bike projects through other projects, other larger projects that are in other sections of our program. So one example of a project that you're all aware of is our Riverside project downtown, where we're implementing protected bike lanes. That project is in our street capital section because it's a large integrated project. But we are implementing elements of ped bike improvements. The ped bike projects are very much driven by our ability to get grant awards to fund these projects. And so when grant opportunities arrive, we look at the criteria, the scoring criteria within the various grants. Many of them are very narrowly focused. And we turn to our comp plan, our neighborhood plan, bike ped elements within the comp plan, and try to find or align the projects with the grants in terms of finding the projects that are going to score the best so we can put our best foot forward. Most of our bike ped related grant opportunities are highly competitive. It's not easy to get grant awards. So an example is our Safe Routes to School program. We recently applied for grants there. We've been shortlisted and we're waiting to hear the outcome of that. But as an example, I think the short list of projects recommended for funding amounted to only, 16 to 18% of the total projects submitted. So they're really competitive programs, so it's important that we apply for projects that have the best chance of being funded. Also want to point out we have a lot of other bike ped projects, and especially on the ped side, they get implemented through some other smaller programmatic elements of our budget, including the traffic calming program, the school safety program, and TBD sidewalks. So really, there's a broad range of ways that ped bike improvements get implemented. It's not solely the projects that are listed in our ped and bike section. I wanted to use this recent grant award as an example. This is our Division Street Pedestrian Hybrid Beacon project. We were awarded an HSIP grant for that, and this kind of displays kind of the life of the project. We presented the project to council committee back in February of 2020, informing them that we were going to apply for a grant. We identified several locations in the community, several corridors, Division Street being one of them. We applied for the grant in March of 2020. The grant was awarded a couple months ago in December of 2020. And that includes pedestrian hybrid beacons, or otherwise known as HOC signals, at 3 locations along Division Street. And that's, we received $1.7 million in grant funds and planning construction in 2023. So this is an example of how some projects kind of enter our program and move forward on the ped bike side of things.
Kevin, I have a quick question for you. I know from the outside we always get a little, well, I shouldn't say we, I get confused because sometimes I hear, well, we can't apply for the grant because it's not on our 6-year plan. And then other times I hear, well, we don't have funding yet, so we can't put it on the 6-year plan. So I think we get a little, I should just say, I get confused on that. Like if we really want to be as competitive as possible on a high priority, even though we don't have funding yet, isn't it a good idea to put it maybe out to year 5 or year 6 to do that so that we can show, no, we're committed, we're going forward. So I'm just wondering about that dynamic.
The dynamic, that's an interesting call out, and I think what the confusion maybe lies is, as Kevin's explaining, each of our chapters have kind of different rules of engagement. So like when we talk about our full reconstruction project, we all understand now that we have a matrix and a full process behind that. And so projects just don't appear. They go through that process to get up there. What Kevin is highlighting in the ped bike program is the process is very open. in the sense that we, again, are so focused on getting the criteria matching up so we can be in the competitive pool and not outside of the competitive pool. And if you go back to your slide there, Kevin, that's why we talk about the fact in Ped Bike, it truly is driven by that grant, not that it's sitting in the program. It is driven by those criteria. And when we go, I'm sorry, your next slide over, talking about the process. So this was just one example, and not expecting you to remember back to February 2020, but we had multiple projects that we actually came to council on in that February 2020 date. This was just one that actually got funded. And so that's the process for Ped Bike projects, is we get that call. We try to figure out the best competitiveness of projects. We utilize the comp plan in terms of the master bike, the PED, and any neighborhood plans to generate the projects that could, again, be eligible for the call in front of us. They typically drive with safety issues and things like that. So we have to, do all the research to find out where we have the accident data to prove our eligibility. Then we bring all those to council in terms of the individual projects, where we want to have that dialogue with council, because that is the process in terms of what do you think about these projects. These are the ones, again, that line up best for compatibility. And it wasn't this particular call, but it was one previous that I thought it was a really good dialogue, and I think it was Councilmember Mumm that was asking about our project up on Highway 2 and just thought maybe the timing wasn't right. So that was good dialogue for us. We ended up in that case not submitting that application based on our conversations with council. And then again, once we submit, we want to bring them back, the ones that we got, and then just remind council of that particular call and what was involved originally and what we actually for end result. So we're trying to put a circle around the Ped Bike project to help understand, so everyone's got more clarity around that particular chapter in our comprehensive, in our CIP, and how those projects come forward.
So if I'm understanding from a big picture, in the Ped Bike space, we'll move forward if we get grants, but in some of the other spaces, we put it on our plan and we move forward whether or not we get grants. Is that?
Well, we move forward looking for grants, right? So that's the focus. So going back to, again, the capital rebuild projects, we've got so many in there. Those are the ones we're focusing on. So every opportunity a call comes in, that's because of all the matrix and all the scoring and all the community effort behind it. That's our focus within the CIP. And yes, they will sit there until we get those done. Without, and this is that a conversation I'd love to have a little further so we have time to really understand this. But if you were to say, that's great, let's prioritize Ped and Bike, it kind of seems reasonable on the front end. But again, when we talk about having to prove accident rates and other criteria, it's not always going to be the number one project on the list. And I'd love, again, to have the conversation, because I think we would leave opportunities because we were waiting for that number one project. It, again, didn't line up with that criteria. But having said that, I would be open to having some kind of general prioritization so we know in general what people want to see first, but also clearly understand if we got the last one on the list because that was the only one that actually met the criteria of that current call, then we should all be excited we got something on the list. And so I kind of think of the bike plan and the PED plan as our, obviously, criteria of prioritization. That's what we're looking at as a community to try to impact, and we're looking at all of those in any one of those calls.
Got it. And I'll let Kevin move on. We'll talk more about it. Thank you. All so helpful to us. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. So the next section, moving on, is our neighborhood section. It's really programmatic in nature. All of the items within that section are programs. And most of these are you as council are very familiar with. It's a school safety program. It's funded by the school zone. The speed cameras, the traffic calming program funded by the red light cameras. There's an unpaved streets section, and then there's the TDD sidewalk section as well. In general, these projects get implemented. They're really they get implemented generally annually, and they're usually a collection of much smaller projects. So those smaller projects are maybe are often mentioned or sometimes mentioned in the narratives in these sections, but we don't have separate standalone projects for every little project. There's many of them, say in the traffic calming realm, many of those are $15,000 to $25,000, $40,000 projects, and our threshold in our budget is typically $60,000. So they're listed more from a programmatic perspective. And then finally, our impact fee section. This is really, kind of a unique or niche section of our program. It's governed by our impact fee ordinance, as well as there's several RCWs and state laws that kind of dictate or determine what you can and can't do in the way of impact fees at the municipal level. Our program is updated roughly about every 5 years. Inga Notes, the primary administrator of the program, it was updated a couple of years ago. And in general, I don't expect you to read this list on the side here, but this is essentially the list of projects within the impact fee program. The projects are largely capacity improvement related projects, often at the intersection level, that are needed to facilitate anticipated growth and development and the traffic that will occur with that in order for us to meet our level of service requirements or criteria. So again, a lot of intersection level, just some examples of projects that are currently in our program that we added last year. One of them is the Palouse and Freya intersection up on the South Hill, and construction of a roundabout there. Another one is up at Lincoln in Nevada, the intersection improvement to widen the intersection for turn lanes and modify the traffic signal to again improve capacity at that location. So that's kind of the normal types of projects you would see in the impact fee program. And then finally, just to touch on street maintenance, again, I mentioned earlier that it's really a separate program in and of itself, standalone. On the arterial side, it's coordinated through the street department. They develop a 6-year program that's periodically updated, somewhat fluid. The funding level is roughly about $5 million a year. It comes out of our arterial street funds that's set aside or dedicated to the street department to perform the maintenance work. Type of work we do under that: granite overlay, chip seals, crack seals. With the granite overlay projects, we often have to upgrade ADA ramps within those areas. And then the process or their locations are prioritized by the street department with their own matrix process that they've developed related to rehab and preservation of pavement. Then on the residential side, roughly $4.5 million funded with TDD dollars and the general street maintenance dollars. Again, similar type of work as in the arterial side, granite overlays with ADA ramps, sometimes chip seals and crack seals. Those projects on the residential side, it's really a collaborative process between the streets department and the CTAP group. And in terms of reviewing preliminary list of projects and establishing prioritization of locations within that program. And then finally, again, reiterate, mentioned earlier, this idea or topic of roadways of significance. Our intention is to have a workshop with TCTS in May and have that process continue over the course of 2021. There, of course, will be touch points ultimately with the council, to bring forward recommendations or options, within that program and kind of summarize for you what the discussions have been. So that's all I had in terms of formal presentation today. Looks like we got a little bit of time left. So if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Nope, it's very helpful. I know your department sometimes feel like you have to keep educating a changing council, but it's really important and it helps us. So I really appreciate the detail and context. Any other questions for Kevin today? All right, thank you so much. That gets us to our third agenda item, which has to do with council meeting procedure discussion. So now that we're in phase 2, there was a question that came to me about whether or not we could have some kind of hybrid open public meetings where some council members are on the dais in addition to me, and some are on Zoom, and there's some technical aspects of that, but there are also some legal aspects. And I think I have Mr. Piccolo, who is our Open Public Meetings Act. I'm going to say expert. He'll probably doesn't want to be the expert, but he's the person I go to. So, Mike, if you could maybe just talk to us a little bit about your understanding of the current world we're in at Phase 2 in terms of any limitations on having more than one person on the dais for these city council meetings.
Sure. Yes, now that we're in Phase 2, we are permitted to include an in-person component to the council meetings. You must still continue the remote access capability, including the call-in. That has to stay in place, but you are allowed to incorporate an in-person component. With certain requirements, you have to comply with the governor's venue guidance for business meetings, which is set forth in one of the proclamations. You got to dig a little deep to find it, and always check to make sure it's updated, which I've been trying to do. And they have certain requirements, such as your capacity is 25% or 200 people, whichever is less. Masks are still required. Spacing is required. You have to provide ability for people to clean their hands with the alcohol rub. You have to clean the rooms after every use. And those are pretty typical protocol that we're going to be faced with through the health district and through the proclamations. And we do have one example. Municipal Court is having the community court meetings at City Hall again on Tuesday. So I've been going down there periodically to kind of check on them and see how they're doing. And one thing I can do is put a call in to Howard Delaney, the court administrator, to see who is helping them with their to meet these protocols. MRSC just recently came out with one of their frequently asked questions, and it was, can you have a meeting where the council members are allowed to come in, but you still disallow the public? And the answer was no. Once you open the meeting for council members, you have to open it to the public. But to get to the council president's question, I think you can give the council members and staff the option to participate in person or to call in WebEx, but also allow the public to either call in or attend in person. So if the concern is there enough room on the council dais, which there may not be, and some members are interested in continuing to participate remotely, I believe you can do that. It'd be very similar to a council member who's traveling on a Monday night and wants to call in for the meeting. That's happened on a regular basis. So in this circumstance, I believe the council members could participate by phone, by WebEx, Zoom, whatever the capacity is, but also allow the public the same remote access, but also the in-person access. And in terms of counting up the capacity, with the MRC guidelines, staff and the council members would not count towards that capacity. So it's 25% or 200 people, whichever is less, not counting staff, council members. However, the council members and staff will count towards distancing. So right away, the council dais fills up pretty quickly, and then you're measuring where is Terry Pfister, where are the other staff members, council staff, city staff. So you have to factor that in. And I think you also have to factor in sanitary concerns for speaking into the microphones for the public. So those are the things that we're going to have to kind of get into the details a bit to kind of sort all that out.
And I'll get to you, Councilmember Cathcart, but one thing I just wanted to follow up from the MRSC, the way I read it was that if you had one person more who wanted to come in who couldn't due to the 25%, you have to recess the meeting. That everybody has to be allowed in who wants to. I believe so. Yeah, so.
And obviously the council has had meetings with very the topics that are very notable to the public where you might pack the council room. But that's not going to be, it's not going to be a reality on those type of topics. But I think there is some capability where if people if you do have a large enough crowd, you can have people, sign up to be able to come in for certain topics, and others might be able to wait in the Chase Gallery if you got to that point. But if everybody wanted to be there for a certain topic and you're beyond your capacity, they have a right to be there. You need to adjourn the meeting and find a bigger location.
Yeah. Okay. Councilmember Cathcart.
Yeah, thank you. And I had heard that the county was looking at the possibility of returning to in-person, and that same obstacle was one that they identified as something that would make it pretty difficult to do, just because if they did hit, by chance, a number that exceeded that 25%, there really wouldn't be a place for them to go because all their technology is set up in their small boardroom. So, but the other thing I had heard was that there's also a requirement related to your HVAC system. The type of HVAC system that you have, is that an issue for us? Do you know if we comply with whatever those regulations are?
I am not sure. I'd have to look into that. I've not read that before, so I need to look into that.
Okay. And then my other question is, if there were three of us, so not a majority of the council, but three of us who wanted to sit distanced at the dais, could we do that without the public in-person component, or would having one more council person other than the council president trigger that requirement to allow the public?
I don't think it would trigger the requirement to allow the public, but MRSC has opined on that situation, and their recommendation is additional council members should not attend. It should be the council president and the necessary staff to run the meeting, but that's it. Because once you start allowing one or two council members in, you haven't reached that quorum yet, but the other council members are saying, well, I didn't know there was going to be 3 people in the council chambers. If I had known that, I would have come down too, and now you've got the quorum. So MRC's recommendation is to not have that scenario.
But that's a recommendation, right? That's not based on the governor's proclamations.
Well, I think their recommendation is to comply with the governor's proclamation, avoid that situation.
Okay.
Other questions, comments? Councilmember Kinnear.
Thank you. Michael, that, as usual, was very informative, so thank you. I'm wondering about if you did decide to open up and say half of the council attends in person, the other half doesn't. Is there an advantage for those who are sitting in chambers over those who are at home? That's the first thing. And the second thing is, how does Channel 5, because the way you're set up right now, Channel 5 is focused on you, Council President, so the other people in the chamber would not be photographed.
Well, Channel 5 is not focused on me at the moment, but the problem, one technology problem, when we did have a couple meetings where we tried to do that, and the question was, which sound system are you using versus the computer? And I typically, not at this meeting, because Hannah Lee's doing it, but typically I have the controls over it. And so when anyone's speaking through my controls, the Zoom camera goes to them. And if when Betsy and Michael were here and they would speak in the microphone, not their computer, the Zoom camera would go to me. And so that was I said Zoom, but it was WebEx. But there's that challenge. You might be able to get around that with headphones and mini mics. But even so, there's a lot of feedback. So there are some technical issues to that. And the other issue that I noticed, not that anyone was doing anything untoward, but we had a lot of ability to communicate with each other because we were on the dais. You know, we could look at each other, give a look or point or something like that, or even talk when the microphone was muted and someone else was talking. And so there is a little bit of a difference there. Again, it was not untoward or anything like that, but the public doesn't get to see or hear that because they're not seeing that. So there's that issue as well.
And so a follow-up to that is, what's the advantage of 3 of you or 4 people being there and then the other people not? Why would we split up that way?
I don't have an answer for that, but if anyone else, I think mostly this conversation was about trying to understand the parameters. So when people ask us what we're doing or not doing, that we understand why we are or not. But I don't know. Betsy, did you have a comment?
I was just going to comment. There was no advantage, Councilmember Kinnear. I think Mike and I just happened to be in the building on those nights, and creatures of habit, we just went downstairs until told to do otherwise. So there was nothing spectacular to our decision at that point.
I'll just say, for me, I just feel like I'm a little bit more effective sitting at the dais, generally speaking, but part of that is also having that in-person component and others there and whatnot. So, I mean, if we're not going to be opening it up to the public right now, I mean, I'm certainly fine continuing in the way that we are. I would just love to see a plan or a goal towards getting back to that in person at some future date, and then make a plan to get there. But
yep. Well, again, I really appreciate you bringing up the issue, because plenty of people have asked me, including the administration, our other boards and commissions are wondering. I had a call from the school board yesterday wondering what we're doing and things like that. And but the guidance we're getting from MRSC, I tend to think that we should keep doing what we're doing now in phase 2. And when we get to phase 3, look at it again. There are some staff costs on the cleaning. And then there's probably a staff/security cost of trying to deal with any lineup outside the city hall, trying to get people in and out and things like that. So I feel like we're best where we are at the moment, but let's look at it again, phase 3. And, we have the legal guidance, and we'll see what the next round is. But I appreciate that. All right, that's all that we have. We do have an executive session that Hannah Lee will send us a link. And let me get my language from City Attorney Ormsby real quickly. Before I do that, I have a communication from Hannah Lee that she is working with IT to figure out a plan for phase 3. So she's working on that as well. But hang on. All right. So the language from the City Attorney's Office for this executive session is for the City Council to consider the evaluation of the performance of a public employee, the potential for litigation, and the need for potential legal advice to the City Council. I'm going to say we'll go into about 16 minutes to 12:35. We don't anticipate any further action, so I'll come back at 12:35 and either adjourn or extend. So council members, please follow the link, and also I've invited a couple of our staff members, but you know who you are. Thanks. All right, so. This is Council President Breanne Beggs. We have finished our executive session, and so we're adjourning our study session. Our next City Council meeting is 1:15 on Monday for the Urban Experience Committee, then 3:30 briefing, and 6 o'clock legislative agenda. Have a great rest of the week and weekend. Take care of yourself.